first is to be in service to our customers, to be in service to the business. Second is to make sure that we're always well capitalized so we can make sure we make the right investments. So I do everything I can to make sure that the business is good, our customers are extraordinarily happy, and we're solving real world problems. And I'm constantly building relationships with investors. When I run this way, investors will raise their hands before I have to knock on their door. Do you have paying customers? Do you have more than one? You don't need hundreds, you don't need thousands. You gotta start seeing an early pattern that it does work. If a customer didn't return, then you have to question, are you really solving a problem? You might have solved enough to sell it, but not enough to keep it.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Design Development, your hub to learn direct from top performers in real estate development, design, and construction. I'm your host, Rens Hayes, founding partner of H&O Lifelong Learner, and I am personally obsessed with high-powered organizations and the leaders that guide them. If this is your first time listening, thanks so much for joining us. And if you're a returning listener, can't thank you enough. Let's go. It's my pleasure to introduce today's guest, CEO and co-founder of Monograph, Robert Yuen. I really got to know Robert through today's conversation. We didn't have any prior relationship and align with him in so many ways. Monograph's been very visible on LinkedIn as they've built their software company. It's really a great tool for architects and engineers. They service over 750 architecture and engineering firms. What I got out of today's conversation is Robert is such an amazing visionary leader. He really has a good understanding of identifying a problem and seeing the opportunity in solving that. He's a people first leader. He's creating opportunity for his team. It really seems like a great place to work. And they have one ambitious vision. It is going to be way more than just a project management and resource planning tool. So check out this conversation, see how a unique business leader like Robert thinks about the business, the difference between creating a software company after being an architect. He was a practicing architect at high-end single family, as well as towers with SOM. So he has a depth of architecture experience and now runs a completely different business, completely different revenue model. Do not miss it. If you know somebody else that would like to learn from Robert's experience, from Robert's journey, please share it with them. Let's get to the show. Please join me in welcoming Robert. Robert, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I've been heavy on LinkedIn for a few years, and I think since I've started that journey, I've heard nothing but great things about Monograph, and I see you and your team out there. Could you help give the audience some context? Tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us what Monograph is all about.
Monograph was started by three ex-architects, and we live and breathe trying to help architectural firms and engineering firms manage the performance and manage the risk of the practice. We do that by essentially offering timesheets, project management, invoicing, payments, and recently we just launched payroll.
How did you come up with the idea to launch Monograph? And I'll say that a business is generally focused on solving a problem. Was there an industry-wide, you're three architects, was there an industry-wide problem that you saw as a frustration from that time?
I think everyone might have seen the exact same problem, myself, Alex, and Mo saw. Every time we go for happy hour, which is very common for most architects, we need that end of the week drink. The things I hear all the time is like, I'm pulling an all-nighter. I'm behind on my schedule. We are behind on budget. I just found out. The project's running behind schedule. We're going to lose money on this. I'm working the weekend. I don't know if I'm going to be on track. When are we going to start the second round of drinks? So these are, that's kind of like the standard
big question.
Conversations we had every Friday night. So that was the problem. It's like, well, that shouldn't be the case. We should be able to do the amazing work that we're tasked to do on time and on budget, and know that we're going to be on time and on budget and not be surprised.
Anytime you're surprised in business, particularly operations and performance, you're certainly playing from behind. You're reacting to your environment instead of being proactive about what you're actually going to do.
Correct. There's a couple times like I'll talk to friends and like, I want to be surprised when I'm being creative. Like those are really good surprises.
Yes.
When it comes down to like money and timeline, I don't want surprises. Like I really don't. Like they're
That's a good way to put
they're
it.
they're generally not a good surprise. But if I'm heads down trying to figure out design detail, or I'm trying to like be extraordinarily creative early in the design process, or I'm late in the process at CA on a construction site, and like you just had an aha moment in terms of how to solve a problem, those are really good surprises. I want those. When it comes to like timeline and money, I don't want surprises.
As an engineering firm leader, I'm also focused on those same, I'll call them flaws, and what they really are symptoms to bigger problems, right? They're bigger problems. So, how does your software, I guess we're talking a lot about the symptoms and the results of those flaws as it impacts the individual project manager, the architects, the people doing the work, right? So, how does your software position itself to help a firm run better to improve the careers and the work environment for the people doing the work?
So I'm sure you know this. Like we all have very similar network of friends. The first problem is, do you track? There's a lot of companies and organizations in the industry that don't track at all.
And what things do you think are most important to
Oh my
track?
God, time.
Time.
You have to track time.
So in your experience, and obviously you're talking to probably more firms than anybody at this point, is there a large percentage of firms that aren't even tracking time
Yes,
relative to projects, let alone phases? They're just not even time tracking.
correct.
And is this a small firm thing or small, mid, large? Like,
It-
where are you finding those?
I think by the time you hit a certain scale, every medium to large firm do track time. You kind of have to, because I think at that scale, leadership understands that like it's one of the most important metrics to see. I think it is a very small firm problem when like you're small and you don't know if there's enough value in tracking time. And the answer is always absolutely a ton of value because you need to know, and you need to make unbiased decisions. If you don't have the data in front of you, you're not making unbiased decisions. You're making like gut calls, which is scary. Like if you're gonna continue to build a business around your ability to be intuitive and make decisions with no data, like at least not in front of you.
Yeah, in a professional service business, which architecture and engineering is, we are a professional service business. It's very much an allocation of time is how we create
Yeah.
value. We have other tools and resources to create better leverage on our time to make it more valuable, or expertise or knowledge and judgment.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, how well we manage our time can dictate how efficient we are as individuals and as a team.
It just puts in a little bit. It identifies constraints, and I think engineers and architects are really good with constraints. We work with constraints all the time, right? There's always a site, there's always a budget, there's always limitations to the work we do. We just gotta be clear in identifying it from the get go.
Tracking time is nothing new. So that's a big flaw that we identified in a firm. So what does Monograph bring to an architecture or engineering firm that they aren't getting just from like a time tracker, right? If that's their big flaw, or there are other compounding flaws that contribute to this greater chaos that you're helping solve with Monograph.
And I want to make sure like people don't misinterpret like the fact that you're tracking time isn't a flaw, right? The fact that you don't track time is a flaw.
Yes.
Once you do
agreed.
track time, then the next question is like, is it a scenario where you're getting garbage in, garbage out type of information? The quality of that information now matters once you start collecting it. So if you use a very, let's say, tool that's old, clunky, not aesthetically pleasing, not user friendly, the quality of that time now is probably at question. Like, is it really that accurate? Especially if you go around the table and you ask the team, do you like the tool that you're using tracking time? And the answer is no. They're probably not spending a lot of time in that tool, and they're probably only guessing, which means you're making decisions on like guesses.
Yeah, approximate information, not
Yeah.
not actual information.
The other problem that I saw, and this goes back to like when I used to it dates me a little bit. Like I love the drafting table.
Yeah.
And I love trace paper. The reason why I love trace paper is because I can layer on multiple traces. I can see a problem with many layers. When you just use a time tracking app on its own, you're not getting the layer effect. And you're really not solving business level problems until you kind of overlay your timesheet data on top of like your project delivery schedule, on top of like your invoicing cadence, on top of how much you've been paid to date, on top of like how much more time you're going to commit in the weeks and months to come. That, let's say, stack of trace paper and information starts to really paint a great picture for a firm leader to make decisions. And that's what Monograph does really well. It has to be integrated.
If I try to reiterate that part of your software and just thinking from our own experience and manage a firm, it seems like you're able to, it's an area that we can also forecast resources. So it's like a resource planner. It's not just documenting time spent in today or the past week or the past month. You're also looking ahead a month, 2 months, 3 months, and trying to allocate time to your current projects under your purview.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
And then that gives us information for firm leaders and managers to be proactive about decision making. It informs the decisions they make today because you can see a storm coming if you're planning for the future.
Correct. Because you're looking ahead, so you know it's coming, which is great. No surprises. What it does also is for all the designers, the architects, and engineers to also build that muscle too, because they're in the software. So like they're not, let's say, making less bad decisions when the time and budget is very clear in front of them. Another way I describe this, like occasionally I need a break. I need to like drive up to Tahoe from San Francisco. I know it's a 4-hour drive. It's great. I can do it. It's a day trip. I'll spend the weekend. I'll ski and snowboard and I'll be back. I drive. And I'm constantly looking at the gas gauge. So I know if I have enough gas, do I need to pull over? Do I need to fill? Should I stop speeding? Is it okay for me to start speeding a little bit up? And that's all because we have a gas gauge. For a lot of businesses, you don't even have the gas gauge and you're kind of like, I hope I make it. And for some of us, the gas gauge exists, but like it's kind of old and it's kind of rusty and I don't know if it's accurate. And that's not good either.
In a similar fashion, you mentioned the gas gauge. Another good car analogy is like the RPMs.
Yeah.
You can't just like run a car endlessly in the red zone on the RPMs. You're gonna blow the engine.
So that
and you see a lot of firms, a lot of companies. This is not just industry specific. Redlining, they're like typical day to day is just redlining their organization. It's because they don't have the gauges to know that's what they're doing.
They don't even know it, and they're redlining the entire business. And the best way for a firm lead to know that they are is like be honest with yourself. How much of your team is actually spending 60 hours plus a week working?
Yeah.
Because if the answer,
and is that the normal?
Well, if it is the normal, then you're definitely redlining like the whole week, 100%. The whole organization. And sometimes it's not the whole organization. It might just be a team, might be a project. It's not sustainable. The engine will blow if you keep humming at that type of capacity all the time.
What flaws did you see in the current software solutions to the things that Monograph is trying to do well? Like, did you think they were underserving the market? How does Monograph differentiate from the other solutions?
Absolutely underserving. Absolutely. The way
in what ways?
Well, one, a lot of the existing software is old. Meaning like it hasn't been innovative since like the 90s. I'm not gonna name names, but I think another company since the 80s. Software has come a long way. And the way we solve problems today in software is very different than what it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20, 30 years ago. The biggest difference in terms of what Monograph does different is like, well, one, seamless, easy. We constantly look at the amount of clicks that our customer has to click, and keeping that really low. We constantly look at like no double entry. Doesn't make sense. Like, why would we ask you to fill in the same information twice?
Totally agree with that.
But a lot of the older software, well, that's not to their fault. Was how software was built 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, because that's, the evolution of technology moves fairly quickly.
If I think of the solutions that we've looked at, because we've been trying to solve these same problems at our firm, just for us personally, and using the available software out there before we knew about Monograph, the pain points that I had in looking at the solutions out there, they all start off as accounting-based software.
Oh, yes.
Which are massive, I'm sure the software behind accounting is fairly complex and a large database. And then they bolted on these because they were pain points in the industry. So they bolt on these other features, but they're not really serviced well, updated well, execute well, loading time, and just the general user interface is overall frustrating to me personally. Like I'm always looking, but it's like the value in the software tends to be focused on the accounting function, not necessarily the full use of the software. And that's where my pain point is. The thing I've noticed you've done at Monograph is you have a lot of project-based, industry-focused accounting features, time tracking, phased invoicing, but you're not really an accounting software. You partner or it integrates, I know with at least QuickBooks Online. Can you talk about that decision on why you went that route and how that allows you to do better things with Monograph?
I love that you brought it up. And I think that this also makes us extraordinarily different than everyone else. And you're correct. All the other software prioritizes the accountant. The reason why it doesn't make any sense to me is if you look at any company, how big is the accounting team? May I ask how big's yours?
Yeah, we have one person, a fractional CFO.
One person. How big is the whole company?
Yeah, we have 20 people. So
But
you're talking 5% of our workforce.
1 out of 20. From my perspective, why would I ever design software for one person out of a 20-person organization? Like, well, where's the real problem? The real problem is actually surfaced by the 19 other people that have to be an architect, a designer, and an operator every single day. It was an extraordinarily conscious decision since day one at Monograph that our number one stakeholder that we solve for are architects, engineers, and people who do the work. That doesn't mean we don't solve a finance problem. We absolutely have to solve a finance problem, but we have to solve it in a way that our number one stakeholder understands. Because like that's 19 people that can get it versus optimizing for the one. That never made any sense to me when we started.
And then for those listeners that might be interested or learning more about Monograph, could you talk about the integration? So let's say it is QuickBooks and Monograph. Is the accountant largely still staying in QuickBooks and they're getting financial information from Monograph in the format that they need, or are they often working in both softwares? Like how do they integrate from an actual use standpoint?
For the accountant should lean on QuickBooks more than Monograph. But there's certain information Monograph does a lot better. So that person might come in to Monograph.
Sure.
So I don't think of it in engineering terminologies. We use like binaries, like true, false, yes, no. I think most things in life is more spectrum. It's not a yes or no. It's more like, is it 90-10, 80-20, 70-30? For an accountant, they should spend most of their time in QuickBooks. Let's say 80% of their time and then 20% of their time in Monograph. For a firm owner, it flips, right? Our expectations for firm owners to spend like 80% of their time in Monograph and then the 20% of their time back in books.
Big focus of design development is the top performer themselves and their journey, their life journey, their career journey. And yours, I think, is particularly unique. It seems that architecture was your first passion. You mentioned you and your two partners were architects first. Yes. That's true. So tell us about some of your early career, your experience as an architect. And I'm going to preface that with another piece is that I noticed you joined about 8 firms in that time period. You jumped around a lot. So talk about one, the advantage you gained, the perspectives you gained from being at so many firms prior to going on this entrepreneurial journey. And then 2, just your general love for architecture.
I love architecture. I've always wanted to be an architect. I remember my first toys were Legos, which I think is a very common toy for a lot of us.
It's a great toy.
Uh, it just allows your brain to be so creative, and you can imagine an entirely new world with Lego sets. I was
Hmm.
really I grew up really poor. So like my parents can only afford to buy me Legos. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and my dad was a Chinese chef. Growing up in Chicago, I got lucky. I did
Hmm.
fairly well in school. So I went to a high school that had an architectural track.
Oh, very cool. That's great to hear from in high
Yeah,
school.
it's really rare. Lane Tech High School. I can't wait because I think our 20-year alumni anniversary is this year. So I'm excited to going back to Chicago this summer, and seeing some people that I have not seen for 20 years. But that was my first exposure to drafting, first exposure to architecture. I competed. I'm highly a competitive person. So
Hmm.
there's city level and state level for architectural design and drafting proficiency. Back in my day, I did really well, well enough that I've won multiple championships. And the
Love it.
prize was always a summer internship. So both my junior year and my senior year, I was able to win summer jobs at
This is in
this is
high
in high
school?
school. So
Wow. So you got exposure in high school. That's
I
really cool.
believe
That's hard to
that
do.
long list that you've read, like some of it might date all the way back then.
Okay.
'Cause,
Yeah, that makes more sense.
Rada Architects, Wilkinson Blender, Halliburton Root, like these are firms that I had relationships with in high school already because I was a summer intern and I like did the classic reorder the library, the material libraries. I did a whole bunch of like templates work and line weight work. I had an amazing time. I knew I was going to be an
That's
architect.
phenomenal. What kind of projects did you work on as an architect?
When I was 16,
Or just in general, your architecture career? Give us the
I was
highlights.
going to say
I'm sure at
I don't know
16.
if I remember. It's quite a long time ago. But throughout my career, I've touched on projects of different scales and different typologies. At Halliburton Root, I did a lot of educational work, a lot of campus work, a
Hmm.
lot of university work. At Skidmore, Owens and Merrill, I did a lot of towers. Most
That's
of it
great.
was international, so a lot of it was in Canada, the Middle East, and China. When I was at Skidmore, Owens and Merrill,
Hmm.
I did a lot of design build work at Wilkinson Blender in Chicago, where
Yeah.
we took projects from start to finish. We were also the GC on those projects. Most of that work was residential work, very little commercial work. By the time I moved to San Francisco, I did about 2 years at a startup called Blue Homes. It was a prefab
Hmm.
company where we did like prefab housing in a factory. Super exciting.
Very
And
cool.
then I did a lot of work around high-end residential here in the Bay Area.
Hmm.
A lot of work for executives in the tech space, and doing like extraordinarily extravagant homes.
That's an exciting market to be in. You get to really maximize your creativity in that type of environment, right?
The budgets were so big that you can do a lot.
And what an amazing, I guess, perspective you gained. You really touched a lot of the corners of the architecture industry, different market sectors. You worked at, sounds like some of the largest projects out there when you're with SOM working on
Mhm.
towers, and then even the highly exclusive custom homes in an area like the Bay Area. You're gaining a really wide perspective of the industry to understand the pain points and the things that have to happen at a smaller firm, at a mid-sized firm, a large firm, designing and building. So you gain a really cool perspective coming into what I would define as your entrepreneurial journey, and launching Monograph. I'm going to list off a few things that you did coming out of architecture, and I would almost define you as a serial
I'm a
entrepreneur.
little
And it
scared
seems like
now.
you found at your home with Monograph, but you launched Section Cut, which is curated collection of architectural
Mhm.
resources. Dixon Mo, which is you build custom software for AEC companies. You have a website building company, which is MG, I think that goes with Monograph, and then the MG dashboard project planning for architects, which I think is now Monograph.
Correct.
Like, where did this entrepreneurial bug come from? Like, was it always there? I know you were competitive, but you're working as an architect, all these different angles of the industry. Like, did a light switch happen? Was there a mentor? Like, what led you down this path?
I think a lot of it was probably just latent in me, and it didn't get a chance to wake up until a certain moment in time. I saw my dad try for a number of years, open restaurants and fail.
That's a tough
It's a really tough business. It's really hard. It's really hard to run. It's really hard to get going. It's really hard to find success.
You talk about those 60-hour weeks being the norm. That's what I think of when I think of the restaurant
And
world.
it's labor intensive, right? Like you don't have the luxury of sitting. You're almost always running, and you're in a hot kitchen. It's really hard work. And I think as a kid, that just gave me a lot of, like, let's say first principles of what it means to make a dollar, and that, like, you got to put in the hard work, and you have to keep trying.
Very cool. And so this entrepreneurial pivot, it wakes up, and is section cut kind of your first? Was this on the side? Was this something you did new?
It was.
Or
It was definitely on the side. So what happened was, after my second master's at Michigan, so I got 2 masters at Michigan. As soon as I finished the second, I decided to build Section Cut for me.
Yep.
Section Cut was a way for me to essentially store all the readings that I did in school, all the tools that I've learned, everything that kind of like comes with like your experience of being a student, but packaged in a way where like it's easy for me to find. What I learned after undergrad was like everything was in like a zip drive or hard drive. And whenever I had to go back to it, oh my God, like it would take me probably longer to find it than it was actually useful. So that's where like the inspiration for Second Cut was.
You're absolutely right about that. It's like, could I just relearn this, or how long is it going to figure out for me to go find the resource?
And I realized like it was just like I just needed to be more organized, and I needed to create something, a bookmarking tool for me. It was a fun project because I was also like working on my portfolio at the time. This was right before I got accepted to SOM. So I had a few months where I can just kind of like stay heads down and build a really nice tool for me. I didn't see this coming, but like I continued to stay really close to my friends that I've met during graduate school. We became lifelong friends, still lifelong friends. And they were like, "This is amazing, Robert. I want this." I was like, okay, like I can figure out how to do that. And that,
no problem.
and like because everyone was like, "Hey, like we run the same problem. Like I want to save information that are relevant to me." And that's how Section Cut started. It was always a nights and weekends project. I eventually brought on 3 other partners, and we turned it into like an educational technology company. What that meant was we were selling workshops to teach students about digital fabrication on the weekends, and we sold them to universities. Generally speaking, not tier 1 universities. Generally speaking, like universities with really amazing facilities, a large endowment, but they don't have like the right faculty to teach. And I was doing that still nights and weekends, which meant I worked Monday through Friday. I took a red eye Friday night, taught a class Saturday and Sunday, either like in Tennessee or Virginia or Boston. I think we did 1 or 2 in Michigan, 1 or 2 in Chicago. And then I'll take another red eye Sunday night to go back to work Monday morning. And
that's burning the candle on both ends right there.
I would suggest not doing that. Like my life lesson there is like I probably pushed myself a little too hard. But it was an amazing time. Like I got to like teach.
That is
I got
exciting.
to be impactful to a lot of students. We taught really creative courses around how to use CNC machines, laser cutting, 3D scanning, multi-axis robotics, all on the weekend. and I was still able to create amazing architecture Monday through Friday.
Yeah. What an exciting time. And uh, I'll applaud you on the action and the commitment you had to like the entrepreneur in you. You identified a problem for you. And it seems like you had an ability or a thirst to learn how to code. You build your own website, this own resource for yourself, and then others see it and they're like, "Hey, I want that." And then you take advantage, and that compounds into education. I think that's a big part of an entrepreneur's journey. Is at some point it's really just identifying a problem and then solving that, and then along the way you realize there's more opportunity here, and then you capture that opportunity.
I yes, like I like solving problems. I like being creative, and I love being in service. Like if I can solve a problem and make someone's life better, even for just a moment, it brings a lot of joy to me. So that's always going to be part of me. That's kind of that's how I run Monograph, and it's how we hear that I continue to advocate that we are in service to the industry.
Hey everyone, quick break from the episode. If you're enjoying today's episode, please send this to a friend, like, share, comment, subscribe. It's the only way we're going to help more people. Let's get back to the show. I want to briefly touch on Dixon
Yeah.
Moe. You build software for AEC companies. Is that company still operational or no? And so you built custom software. Like what? Give us some examples. Like what are a project or two you guys were most proud of?
Have you heard of Figma?
Yes.
They were one of our largest clients.
Come on, that's so cool.
So we did some work for Figma, we did some work for IDEO, and we did some work for other tech companies. What's fascinating is like a lot of these tech companies will occasionally hire like outside talent, outside consultants to come in and help them like build. So Dixon Moe did that. Dixon Moe's
You're like fractional back end software building.
correct.
You're an outsourced resource for a company that
Exactly. Dixon and Moe was started by Alex Dixon and Mo Amaya.
Yeah.
They are both trained as architects from MIT, but they're self-taught software developers. Like it's incredible. They're so smart.
That experience to me is standing out as an opportunity for you, your partners. You got exposed to many different problems and ways to think about software. So you're not only helping that company, but you're also learning a lot from them on how they approach and what problems they run into, right? So then you start to pick up your learning curve in the software in the business world is accelerated through that type of business.
Correct. And that's how I met amazing CEOs like Dylan at Figma and like got to spend time with him in terms of like how did he start, where did he start, and he eventually became a Monograph investor, one of our earliest investors.
Very exciting.
But you're absolutely right. Like being around amazing individuals that are doing incredible things that are 1, 2, 5, 10 years ahead of you can absolutely speed up your personal, professional growth. And it's done wonders for me. It's done wonders for both my co-founders, Alex and Mo.
Such a good lesson.
Yeah. We also got lucky. Like you don't know these things when you're just at the time, like you're just, we're three, you can call us kids. Like, hey, we're three kids that like really want to build software. We kind of decide we don't want to be a traditional architect anymore. So let's go do that. And then one thing leads to the next, another thing leads to another thing. And here we are with Monograph.
Opportunity presents itself when you're leading with curiosity and trying to solve new problems. Like you don't necessarily have the vision, but that vision continues to build as you gain new experiences. It's really cool.
I think the more you do things, the more doors open. So you should never have like an opportunity problem.
Well said.
Which is fascinating because I think that absolutely applies to architects and engineers too. Like if you're always out there, like you're never going to have a shortage of opportunity. Where it becomes much more important now is like your ability to execute.
You've learned all these lessons. You've scratched the entrepreneurial surface. You've worked as an architect. You see the flaws. You know the problem. How did you guys get Monograph off the ground? Did you start building the inner workings of what Monograph is today? Did you raise capital out of the gate? Did you have to bootstrap it for a while? How did you look at launching Monograph?
Because we've also like was doing software for other companies, we could write software on our own. So that's where we started. Right out of the gate, it was like, we know the problem we want to solve. Let's just start building it. And let's start building the first thing that we have to solve, which is time. Let's figure out how we can solve a timesheet problem for architects. And let's put it out and see how many early architects would use our product, and to see if we are really solving a problem. So we built in the early days for at least a year. And then we had enough traction that like investors were interested. And
what does enough traction look like at that stage? Because this world, the tech world, is very unknown, uncharted territories to many architects, engineers, and contractors.
Traction means,
developers.
Do you have paying customers? And do you have more than one? Like one doesn't count. You don't need hundreds, you don't need thousands, but you got to have more than one, and you got to start seeing an early pattern that it does work.
Product market fit was like returning customers really important to
Absolutely. Like if a customer didn't return, then you have to question, are you really solving a problem? You might have solved enough to sell it, but not enough to keep it. And that's not good.
It's a good point. So when I learned this perspective talking about product market fit is like, your first sale does not prove product market fit. Your first sale to a customer. That means that you understand the problem and you can market and sell well. If they buy a second time, now you know you can execute and actually solve the problem you sold on. And that's what you're looking for in any type of venture.
And if you're in software, and software is very different now than it was 10 years ago. Like almost all software has moved into a subscription-based business model. So you can literally track it. So like, did they pay the second month?
Everything's trying to become a SaaS model.
Did they pay the third month? Did they pay the fourth month?
Yep.
By the sixth month, do they still love you? And the answer continues to be yes. Like I think we're doing a really good job. I think we're really solving a problem because the answer continues to be a yes.
So you have product market fit. You're about a year in. You've bootstrapped to that point. What challenges were you facing at that point? Like what were you trying to accomplish? What challenges were you facing?
So to bootstrap something means you still have to make money elsewhere. So like at that point, we were still Dixon and Mo because like we still needed clients. That was our primary income. The problem we were running into was we were starting to compete on where we want to spend our time. We really want to spend 100% of our time on Monograph. But just because we have a little bit of traction doesn't mean that it can essentially offset our living expenses. It's not achievable.
Sure.
But we got to a point where like there's enough here. We want to spend all of our time on it. We can't. We have to make a decision. And I think that point we made a decision like let's decide to try to raise our first seed round. And with that seed capital, we can continue to work on this 100% of our time.
And that's what it really allowed you to do.
And there was a condition. If we were able to raise that seed capital and spend 100% of our time on it, we have to also understand that we're going to shut down Dixon and Mo. Because we did not want any like competing attention to our time. Like time is not infinite. We wanted to make sure we have 100% focus.
That part of technology company or software companies is totally different than, say, an architecture and engineering business. So, for instance, we bootstrapped H&O. We didn't need outbound funding to come in, but our upfront capital spend to get a viable business off the ground is much lower than a software company. You have a lot of upfront investment of time, money, resources just to get a usable product that you could sell at scale.
Yes.
And that's the difference in the two businesses, that where you really need investment funding, whether that's from an individual, yourself, if you can do it, if you've had some success in the past, but ultimately you're forced into this investment model because the upfront capital expenditures are so high just to build a usable software.
If you assume every employee here in the Bay Area, software engineers, at least 100,000, if not 200,000 in salary. You need one team, which is like 10 individuals at 100,000 each. There's $1 million up front.
Yeah. And if it's 100 to 200, you're at 1.5 real quick, just an annual employee
That's
cost.
just straight costs. Straight costs on just labor and salary, let alone rent, right? Office space, equipment, insurance, comps. It adds up really, really fast. To the upfront cost of building a software company is extraordinarily high.
So Crunchbase, I think, is the resource that gave me this information. So you did a Series A capital raise of 7.4 million. That was in May or June of 2021, and then you followed that up with a Series B capital raise of 20 million, and that was in November of 2021. So just a short 5 months later between Series A and Series B. Could you talk about the timing of the Series A raise? So 7.4 million. What was that raise funding? Was it more time for your team, like you just said, a team of tens, like 1 to 2 million, call it 1.5 million? Like, what was that money on Series A? What was the sell to the investors that money was going to be used for?
I go back and think about like the earlier conversation when we continue to build relationships, and we keep opportunities extraordinarily open. Even till today, there's a lot of investors that are extraordinarily open and excited about Monograph and what we're doing here. What's really incredible about
It is exciting.
what we're doing is like no one's accepted the challenge, really, in modern times of solving this really difficult problem. And to have one company say, I will commit and I will dedicate to this problem and solving it is extraordinarily exciting to a lot of investors. The Series A investor, we've had a long-term relationship prior. So she's known what I've been trying to work and trying to build and trying to solve for months and years prior to like the actual commitment to the deal. So it didn't come as a surprise, and I wasn't fundraising. Nor was the B.
So you weren't even fundraising
No.
at this time. This was just known relationships and people that were supporting the initiative and the vision of Monograph.
Obviously, we've stayed in touch, and obviously we know each other's roles, right? Like Nina, who's an investor, she's a phenomenal investor. John, who's a phenomenal investor at Tiger, and they know that my title and role as a CEO. Like, so we know there would be a moment in time when it might be the right fit. But I always present myself where like my job as CEO first is to be in service to our customers, to be in service to the business. Second is to make sure that we're always well capitalized so we can make sure we make the right investments forward. So I do everything I can to make sure that the business is good, our customers are extraordinarily happy, and we're solving real world problems. And I'm constantly building relationships with investors. When I run this way, what's exciting is like investors will raise their hands before I have to like knock on their door. The only decision I have to make is like, is this the right time? It's like, yes, you're interested. Thank you. I'm really grateful. Like, is this the right time for Monograph to accept the next round of capital, and does it make sense for the business?
I'm sure that's a challenging thing to do in a scaling company that has taken on funding and knows they will take on funding in the future, in terms of, is this the right time? Because just because somebody is willing to give you $5 million, $10 million doesn't mean you have a means to allocate $5 to $10 million today. If you don't have a plan for the money, it's really hard to generate the return and the value that you're trying to promise an investor.
It's a relationship, and like I don't want to sour that relationship. Right. If I don't see an immediate path in how I can leverage and deploy that capital so that we're all winning at the end, like customers are winning, the business is winning, and the investors who are backing the business are winning too, then it's probably not the right time. What's also really important is this the right person? Because they're going to invest in the business, and I want our investors to be aligned with my super long term vision for what we're trying to solve here at Monograph. Like, you have to be aligned. I see a lot of problems when
Alignment in investors is probably paramount. I imagine that's like the most critical,
Very
both
critical.
in expectation and return of capital, like time horizon, and also intent. You mentioned you're very focused on the customer, and you need investors that understand the focus on the customer creates a quality organization, long lasting customers that ultimately creates the
Yes.
return. And if there's any type of conflict in that strategy, then it's not a good
I
fit.
meet a lot of investors that are in it to flip. So like in architecture, there's also a lot of flippers, right? Like there's people who will
Hmm.
buy a property, fix the property, sell the property for a quick return. I make it
Yep.
really clear to anyone who's interested in investing in Monograph that if that's what you want, you're not going to get it here. And that doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It just means like this is not the right relationship. And that's okay. It doesn't mean
Yep.
we can.
It's not the right vehicle. The vehicle doesn't
Correct.
fit your
Because like
investment goal.
if you're ever gonna ask like Robert White, I want to return faster, I'm gonna generally say no. Like we're in it for the long
Hmm.
game. And if you're not in it for the long game from the get-go, we're just misaligned. Alignment is so important.
Total addressable market. I'm interested on how you look at the addressable market in the architecture. And now you've recently pivoted from only architects to now engineering firms as
Mm-hmm.
well, of which we live in that camp. So how did you size up the opportunity of creating Monograph and evaluate the market?
So I meet a lot of founders too that start with sizing up the total addressable market first. We've
Hmm.
here have taken in a conscious decision to not look at that first. We look at like, well,
Okay.
what are we trying to build for? What's our purpose here at Monograph? The way I describe it to the whole company is like we want to be a system of record for everything that's built in the world. Like that's a really big challenge. Like how do we become the record for every building, for everything that's in the built environment in one centralized place?
That is a big goal.
Really big goal, not impossible, but extraordinarily difficult. And to do that, you cannot solve the problem if you ever start in the middle. So we have to start
Yep.
where the problem starts, which is like right where architecture starts, right? When the first creative idea starts, when the first client says, I will fund this project, that's where Monograph
Hmm.
starts and we march forward. The reason why I bring this up is the TAM is now a reflection of how we look at like the direction of the entire business.
Yep.
So it wasn't a pivot to go to, and solve an engineering problem. It was always part of our plan because we're trying to be the system of record for everything. At some point, we have to include how do we solve problems for engineers. At some
Hmm.
point, we have to solve a client problem. At some point, we have to solve a procurement and bidding problem. At some point, we have to solve a general contracting, construction administration, RFI problem. The way we're going to grow here at Monograph is one problem at a time.
Wow. That is a massive vision. I love the ambition.
But
And the vision to start in the field that you know most about. You were practicing architects, so you're closest to the problem in architecture, and to start there and know that you need to serve a niche well in order to grow to the other areas. But that's a mission or a vision worth worth a career focused on for sure.
if all things go well, like I think this is going to keep me busy for at least 3 to 4 decades. Because it's not going to be an easy task, right? We spent a couple years just on architecture. We're going to probably spend a couple years just on engineers to get that right.
Hmm.
Then we're going to probably have to figure out how do we solve the bidding and negotiating the process that's right between CDs and CA.
Yep.
Then we have a really hard challenge, which I think some big companies already solve, like a Procore that solves the CA problem.
Yep.
The good thing is I don't have to solve that problem yet. The simple thing is it's very linearly, and for architect friends, similar to how like a phase of a project works, that's kind of our business model. We started with
Yep.
timesheets and we really just wanted to solve like a pre-designed SD timesheet tracking, DD phase, CD phase first. We're now moving into engineers and eventually we'll move into CA. It's just a matter of time.
That's an exciting journey. I'm going to be even paying closer attention now that I know how big your aspirational vision is. I'm in full support. To move to a recent article I saw in the Architects newspaper.
Mm,
You were in an interview on mitigating risk in today's uncertain economy, which is a hot topic everywhere in every industry, but certainly one in architecture and engineering, and real estate development, right? Like we're pretty close to the beginning of that wave of uncertainty hitting each market because interest rates immediately impact a developer's
mm,
cost to create a new development. And being on the front end of those developments as designers, architects, and engineers, we see that wave of uncertainty coming. And that's before a contractor will feel in their backlog. That's before other subcontractors or other industries feel that. So could you talk to us a little bit about that conversation? And you also have your 2023 strategic risk report, which was all kind of tied into this article. So let's talk about the uncertainty in today's market.
I'm really excited because I think we need to talk about it more. There's a lot of uncertainty that's happening right now. And I've personally went through the 08, 09 and have seen a lot of my friends get laid off in 08, 09. The firm that I was at during 08, 09 also went under. And I think some of the
Oh,
biggest
wow.
reasons in back then was like we didn't see it coming. It was a surprise. Go back to the earlier part of this podcast. We don't want surprises. I feel a huge amount of accountability and responsibility as the CEO of Monograph. When we see something coming, it's not just my job to tell our customers, but it's part of my job to make sure I share this with everyone so that we can prepare
Yes.
and we're not surprised.
Not
No.
surprised. There's a
And
theme.
then in that report, to give really like tactical things that everyone can do, things that like it's a strategic report, but I read a lot of strategic reports. And a lot of times you read a strategic report and like, I can't do this. It doesn't apply. I don't have the resources to do it. It becomes really far fetched in terms of like how to actually put pencil to paper. So we really spent a lot of time making sure we interview a lot of amazing professionals in this space, both architects and engineers and finance professionals. What can we actually do quickly as an industry? And what are the things that we watch out for? We did amazing work and we've categorized the entire report into 4 themes.
Into
Yeah.
4 themes. So we're going to share that link. I know it's available on your website,
Yes.
monograph.com. Is that
Yes.
right? Monograph.com. I want to bring up 2 particular topics within that report that I think would be good to address. Economic uncertainty strains client relationships. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, absolutely. Let me see if I can like simplify what we meant there. We said earlier that architecture engineers are professional service providers. We are. Our clients and the health of their finances is really important because it gives us as architects and engineers a metric, a meter in terms of what's the health of that project. Is it going to go on pause? I don't want to be surprised. How is our clients' financial positions today, and is it going to be healthy moving into the future? Most of the work, we're extraordinarily privileged. Architecture is not cheap, and it takes a long time. So, understanding that the clients that we serve, they might be exposed to the public markets. Well, if we've been listening to what the public market's been doing, it generally speaking is down 50 to 90% over the last 12 months. Well, that
Creates anxiety.
that definitely
That's for
creates
sure.
anxiety, and that definitely creates uncertainty, at least absolutely for a client. As architects and engineers, we have to acknowledge that that might be the case, and we have to build a really close relationship to understand, are they exposed and does it impact the work that we're doing right now? We want to solve problems. If it does, let's get ahead of it, right? No, I don't think either party will want surprises where projects have to pause. We can get in front of it and solve problems together.
Yeah. Don't ignore that don't try to ignore the problem. Acknowledge that
Yeah.
it exists and talk about it.
Yes.
Because if that's the case, you get on the same page, and there's problems that we can help solve that are beyond the actual project we're designing,
Correct.
right?
And like we can toggle up and down, we can keep a project alive. There's a lot of creative tools as architects and engineers we have at our disposal, but we only know to leverage that when there's a clear line of communication with our clients, and there's a clear relationship that's built there so that you can be open and forward and candid in terms of like, is this project still healthy?
Leadership actions leaders can take to reduce money risk. That was a hot topic in there. Is there any one or two things that you'd like to share? What are ways leaders can reduce their money risk?
Cash. First thing is understand how much cash you have. Like,
Yes.
If you don't know, please run to your bank account and look at it. But like to manage the risk of money is to first understand how much money do you have. The second thing that you should like really dig in with that money, if all the projects dried up, how long can you survive?
How long?
It's a fairly extreme approach. I like it because it kind of like the ideal scenario is that never happens. But it gives me a really good barometer of like how fast do I need to like switch my focus as a firm leader to building more pipeline for work. Right? If that number is really low, like I'm not designing anymore. I am like out building relationships and trying to get new work because I know the number is low. If the number is healthy, then I'm really starting to lean on like where we can get efficiencies. Because I think what happened with a lot of firms during the last 2 years is we all grew a lot. There's a lot of work. A lot of firms hired as a way to solve that problem. What's probably not going to happen now is like a lot of hiring. We need to actually stay fairly similar in size and just execute on the work.
Yes.
First is like really mitigating that risk is understanding what is your cash position, and really understanding the efficiency of that cash position. So like we're looking at utilization rates, we're looking at realization rates, and depending on where you stand, the suggestion is to start building pipeline for new work.
Yeah. You need pipeline. And you mentioned cash. The two most important metrics in business are often profit and cash flow. Cash flow being very, very important. And architecture and engineering, construction, AR is always a big accounts receivable, which is work that you've billed for, but you haven't yet been paid. And in times of economic uncertainty, it can be really challenging to collect that money. So having good practices in collecting AR, I think, is extremely important, and making sure your entire team understands the importance of getting it done.
Bolani gave an amazing quote in the strategic report about understanding the collection period. What is your collection period?
Defining it.
The way I interpret that is I use the word cadence. Do you invoice every month? Or do you invoice on the end of a phase? These are really important things to just say, well, what is it for your business? If you're invoicing on the completion of a phase, which means you might not invoice for many months, that's very scary during times of uncertainty, because you might go a couple.
That is terrifying. Do companies
do that?
Is
Yes.
that a common thing?
My typical personal advice whenever I hear it is like, please go to monthly. You need to standardize, and you need to have some predictable cash flow so that you can continue to have confidence in making payroll. Like the expense that does happen all the time, you cannot escape payroll.
You can't escape it. It has a very frequent cadence.
So this is like not an MBA level business knowledge. It's like try to design a business where you match the cadence of your cash flow with the expenses of your that you have to make all the time. The simplest approach for small businesses is you have employees and you have payroll runs. If you do not have predictable cash flow that matches to that, that's the first area to start solving a problem.
Yeah. Equally important, uncertainty in an economic condition like today, but also in a growth period. It takes cash to grow. So when you're using a tool like Monograph, where we have a tool that we can forecast our team, our needs, our uses, you can also forecast your cash demand. So you're going to know whether or not you're going to have the cash to grow or if it's going to be tight. And again, it's seeing the storm before it comes.
Yeah.
Right. So you can actually be proactive and solve the problem before it happens. That's the importance of forecasting.
Super important.
Robert, thank you so much for joining us today. I am excited for Monograph's future. I think you guys solve a major problem and a nice, user-friendly, great platform. So I applaud you for tackling this challenge. 2 questions to close out today's conversation. What's a top book or podcast you'd recommend?
Oh, This Day in Startup is a podcast that I love right now. And it goes through other founders' journeys in terms of how they grow from 0 to 1.
How they grow. So it's a founder journey. Say that one more time. What was the name of the podcast?
This Week in Startup.
This Week in Startup. Great recommendation. And best advice for emerging leaders.
Set smart goals.
Set smart goals. And that's the acronym SMART goals, specific, measurable.
Yes, you got it.
Set smart
If you don't
goals.
know it, if you're listening, Google it. What is a SMART goal? And you'll understand what each word, each letter of SMART means. I don't think the industry does it enough. I don't think young managers know to do it. And I think it can absolutely be a forcing function from growing from a young manager to a really excellent manager when we can set alignment, expectations, and goals appropriately.
Robert, thanks so much again for joining us today, and welcome to the design development community.
Thank you for having me.
Hi, everyone. Real quick before you leave for the day, if we could ask one favor. If you enjoyed today's conversation, if you're enjoying all the conversations on design development, please share this with someone that you think will benefit from it. Our goal is to help as many people in the design, development, and construction industries. And with your help, I think we can spread the word and help more people. Thanks for tuning in, and can't wait to hear from you next time.